12, Yahweh speaks to Abram. So as we are here in Genesis 12, we've left the rebellion at the Tower of Babel. We've left the division that we read about in Genesis 10 that resulted in the 70 nations. We've left all that behind us. And we ended last week in Genesis 11. And what began to happen is the genealogies that started out about Shem, Ham, and Japheth have now focused on Shem. And more than focusing on Shem, we begin to focus on Eber. Again, that's where we get the word Hebrew. But more than that, last week at the very end of the lesson, we begin to focus on Terah. If you remember, Terah was in Ur of the Chaldeans. He was called out of Ur, we think. At least he felt he was. He was planning to go to Canaan. He stopped in this place called Haran. We'll talk more about that. But he never, ever left. We don't know the whole backstory, but here's what we do know. He purposed in his mind to go to Canaan for whatever reason, whether God had spoke to him or he was following Abram, we're not sure. But Abram left Haran ultimately, and Terah did not. And there's probably a good faith lesson in that for all of us. But ultimately, the story is going to tighten today, and we're going to really begin to develop Abram and Sarai and the promise that it's from this line that God intends to send the one who will crush the head of the serpent, Genesis 3:15, the one who will, as we will read today, be the seed that will bless all the families of the earth. So the scarlet thread of the promised Messiah will be picked back up again here in Genesis 12, and we'll develop it a little further. Now, as you think about that, let's be honest. Abram, at this point where we enter the story, is 75 years old, not a young buck. His wife, Sarah, is 65 years old, not a young lady. And by the way, she's barren. She can't have any kids. So just set all this in your mind as we begin to read these great and amazing and precious promises that God makes. Because I'll be honest with you, this is what God often does. He will set the table in such a way that the deck is totally stacked against him, Janice. He will set the table in such a way that it can't be done. He'll set the table in such a way that everyone who's reading the account will go, that's not going to work. That must be hyperbole or an exaggeration because he can't do that. He's 75, she's 65, and she's barren. Have you read the email? And then you know what God will do? What God can do. And that's whatever he wants to do. And he'll fulfill his word right in front of us. And Deb, if you will, I'll keep filling the space with some noise as Rich has a question.
Is this working?
It is.
Oh, good.
So we're going to see that scarlet thread picked up again today in Genesis 12.
I just want to share that even though Abram was 75, he made it to 175, so that's like being 40. So, 75 is the new 40, so I just wanted to share that.
So thank you, brother, and you're right. They lived longer ages, but if you remember, they were coming down drastically at this point in history because of the changes during the global catastrophe that we call Noah's flood. So they were living over 900 years. Noah was the last guy to live over 900 years. The ages are shrinking drastically, but Abraham would live to the ripe old age of 175. But nonetheless, God would fulfill his word in him. Now, where we left off last week, so that we get back in context, Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarah, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and by the way, his daughter too, right? We talked about that, different mother. And they went forth from Ur of the Chaldeans to go where? To go to Canaan. This is not Abram with this purpose in his heart. This is Terah. Now, we don't know if Terah was following Abram, if Abram said, God spoke to me and we need to go, or if God spoke to both of them. But you can read the account, and clearly Terah seems to be planning to go to Canaan. But he gets to Haran, and guess what happens? He never, ever leaves. I pray that's not the story of our life. I pray our walk of faith doesn't end like that. Rich set out to go here, and he ended up over there and never, ever made it. I pray that's not our story of walk of faith. So that I don't bury the lead, I want us to see really the great and precious promises right now, right up front, that God makes to Abram before we unpack them. Because in unpacking them, you can lose them. You just go one to the other. I want you to see them all in totality, all in context of what we're going to read together. The first promise that he makes, and we'll see this in a second, I will make you a great nation. We read about the 70 nations, Carol. That's not God's plan. He's going to take this 75-year-old man and his 65-year-old barren wife, and he is going to make of them a great nation. That's what Yahweh said. I will bless you. The creator of the universe looks at this pagan who he called out of darkness in the Ur of the Chaldeans, and he looks at him here in Haran as he gives him a second calling, and he gives the promise that I will bless you. Can you imagine the creator of all things showing up in your living room and saying, I intend to bless you? He has, in the person of Christ. And he showed up right now, and he's reminding you of all that you possess in Jesus. The third promise, I will make your name great. This guy doesn't even have any children. This is some guy roaming on the backside of the desert. How can God do this? This is hyperbole. This is like exaggeration. No. When God says it, a God who cannot lie, he's going to do it. He fully intends to make this man's name great. We'll talk about it when we get there. I'm doing all of this, Yahweh says, so that you will be a blessing to others. Guess what? I'll say it again. We don't have to go very far. God has blessed all of us so that not we would be reservoirs of blessing, not so that we could pile up a treasure trove of blessing, so that we could be conduits of blessing. God has blessed you and I with all the things that he's blessed us with, and it's different for each one of us. We've each been uniquely gifted, uniquely qualified, uniquely outfitted with material things and earthly things and spiritual things that we might bless others and bless his name. We're not the end game. He is and others are. Number 5 on the list. I will bless those who bless you. Terry, it wasn't enough for God to say, I'm going to bless you. It would have been enough. I mean, it is enough. And in fact, I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to pronounce blessings on other people who bless you. I'm going to bless you through others. I'm going to double bless you. That's what he told Abram. But look what he said next. And those who dishonor you, I will curse. Larry, good morning. Eileen, good morning. Thank you for joining us. I will curse. Not my words, Yahweh's words. Number 7, the clincher, the big daddy, the impossible to fulfill. How is this going to happen? In you, Abram, shall all the families of the earth be blessed. I don't have any kids. My wife's barren. In you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Oh, you mean the nation of Israel. In you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. This is the scarlet thread. This is the promise of the coming Messiah. This is the gospel in the Old Testament. This is the euangelion, Greek word, good news. This is the good news tucked away in Genesis 12 of what God plans to do. He just picked it back up, that scarlet thread, and pulled it a little bit and just put a little light on it before he sets it back down. And then a promise that will come later, not in Haran, but once they get to Canaan. Once they've arrived, once Abraham and his entourage have arrived, Abram and his entourage, to your offspring I will give the land of Canaan. I will give this land to them. So we're going to see these promises play out, but don't miss number 7. Don't miss the scarlet thread. Don't miss God's promise, because we are inheritors of that promise. It's the seed of a woman, the seed born of Abraham, the seed singular, not plural, who God planned to and indeed bless all the families of the earth. Doesn't matter if you descend from Shem, Ham, Japheth, or any combination thereof. You can be blessed by the Almighty God, as you place faith in his Son, Jesus Christ, brought into a relationship with him. So that's where we ended. This is the lead, so I didn't bury it. Anything before we jump into Genesis 12 and start just plowing our way through the verses? Okay, let's get going, y'all. Yahweh appears to Abram. Verse 1, now Yahweh said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Now, we don't know what this looked like. We wonder, right? Did he said it, but how did he say it? Did he say it in a dream? Maybe. Did he say it in a vision? Possibly. Did he say it in some other way that we're not thinking of? We don't know. But here's what we do know. We know that God spoke in some kind of way to Abram, and Abram understood what God was saying. There was no ambiguity here. He didn't wake up and go, I had some heartburn last night, and I feel like I got this sort of hazy interpretation. No. He understood that Yahweh had communicated with him, and he understood the communication, and the communication was an imperative. That's a command. It was not this, Abram, you should consider going. You should consider following me by faith. He said, depart, go now. This was a command from God to Abram. Now, by the way, he's in Haran when this is happening. Let's read what happened in Ur, because this is not the first time. Stephen, as he preached that amazing sermon before the Sanhedrin, which, by the way, cost him his life. That's how great this sermon was. It put them in a rage, and they ultimately killed him. Here's what he says. So Stephen, as he looks upon the Sanhedrin, he says, brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham, that would become his name, when he was in Mesopotamia, when he was in Ur of the Chaldeans, when he was in the Mesopotamian valley between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. Our God of glory appeared to our father Abram when he was in Mesopotamia before he lived in Haran. We're reading about what God said in Haran. He had already showed up in Ur of the Chaldeans to speak to Abram for sure, and he may have spoke to Terah. And here's what he said to him then. Go out from your land and from your kindred and go into the land that I will show you. There's a lot of points of application we could draw right here, right? You ready for this? Abram had already been called in the Ur of Chaldeans to go. And he was partially obedient, which I bet most of us tell our children partial obedience is disobedience. I'll let you feather that on Abram however you like. God in grace, mercy, and kindness shows up again in Haran and once again speaks into Abram's life, and he says, go, follow me, walk by faith, trust me, go to a place that I will show you. That's what he says to him. Now that would have been enough, right? Probably not for us, but let's be honest. But it should have been enough, right? If God speaks to us clearly, we get it, we understand, he says go, so we're going to commit to go. We're going to commit to go to this place that God is going to show us. We're going to join Abram on this journey. But let's look at what else God says. Not just go. That would have been enough. So he tells him to go from your country, go from your kindred, leave your dad here in Haran, go. Verse 2. We now begin this string of 7, and then we'll pick up the 8th promise in verse 7. 7 promises all compacted together, like smashed together. Promises that God, Yahweh, God, is making to this man, Abram. So let's just walk through them. Verse 2, we see the first promise, promise number 1, I will make you a great nation. We talked about it in the run-up. But we had the 70 nations. No, I will make you a great nation. But I don't have any children. No, I will make you a great nation. But my wife's barren. I will make you a great nation. That's what Yahweh told him. And I would remind us, Genesis 11:30, Sarai is barren. This is an impossible promise in the current circumstances and situation. This is like audacious. This is incredible. This is amazing. This can't be done. I'll ask you a question. Did he do it? He took this man and woman and raised up a nation who he would then use to judge the Canaanites, just like he said he was going to do. He would raise up this man and this woman and bring the Messiah through their line, just like he said he was going to do. You see, this is what we sometimes miss. God can do anything. There's nothing outside the scope of his power and possibility, and he promised him he was going to make of him a great nation. And you ready for this? That is precisely and exactly what he did, and he brought the Messiah through that line. Still in verse 2, because we're smashing promises together, God is just reeling these out with Abram. I will bless you. Imagine the creator of all things looks at this pagan man. Go, follow me, walk by faith. I will make you a great nation, and I will personally take the responsibility of blessing your life. That's not Rich's commentary. That's Yahweh's commentary. And when we read things like that, here's what goes through my mind. But did he do that, and how did he do it? I mean, really? I'll just give you a couple examples, and I'll let you decide. We're going to end here, Lord willing, in chapter 13, verse 1, as Abram goes out of Egypt. By the way, what's he doing in Egypt? We'll get there soon enough. He and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him into the Negev. We'll talk about that. Abraham was very rich in livestock, in silver, in gold, in donkeys, in horses, in camels, in servants, and in slaves. God did indeed, in short order, bless him materially. But it's much more than that. That's just nothing. Look at this. Over and over again, we see this in the book of Genesis about Abraham. And God said to Abraham. And God said to Abraham, the greatest blessing you and I will ever enjoy is not riches or wealth or camels or donkeys or money or a 401k. It is hearing from our Creator. We crack open the Bible. We're not reading an old book with nice tales in it. We're reading the very words of God. Holy men of God spoke as they were moved, as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. We have the very words of God. We are indeed just like Abraham, and more so. He had morsels of the truth. We have everything God has to say to us. We live in a time such as this where we have the whole revelation of what God wants to say. And so now I'll bring it up. Every time you ask me, how are you doing? I will quote Ephesians 1:3, and I will say that I am blessed with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ. And if you're a believer, so are you. You see, Abraham is only a dim picture of the blessings that you and I enjoy. God has withheld nothing from us. No spiritual thing has been withheld from you. Nothing that's going for your good has been held back from you. We indeed, as Christians, have been blessed by our Father, blessed with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places. So I'll make your name great. I will I will make of you a great nation. I will make your name great. And then finally, I'm going to read that correct yet. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. And then finally, the third I want to get to, I will make your name great. Two lines I want to draw for you. If you remember back to the Tower of Babel, go back to that lesson, you remember they began to clump together because they were worried about being dispersed over the face of the whole earth. And they said, let's gather together and build this tower so that we can, anybody remember how it ended? Make a name for ourselves. We want to be famous. Here Yahweh shows up with Abram and he says, follow me by faith. Go where I'm telling you to go. And you ready for what I'll do? I will make your name great. Did God do that? Did God make Abraham's name great as promised? Think about the three major religions, two of which are a religion, one is a relationship. Is the name Abraham revered in the Christian faith? Hebrews 11. He's in the hall of faith. More ink is used of his faith than any other patriarch. He's venerated in Christianity. What about Judaism? Venerated for his faith in Judaism. What about the Muslims? Venerated. God did indeed do exactly what he said he was going to do, in spite of any reason we might come up with why this can't be done. He did precisely what he said he was going to do, as God always does. The Tower of Babel, they were worried about making a name for themselves. God shows up and looks at this nobody and says, I'll tell you what, you follow me by faith and I'll make you a great name. And so here's just the application I want to make for you and I. 1 Peter 5:5b and 6, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, what? That he may exalt you in due time in the way that he wants. And I added in the way that he wants just for effect. But you get the point. We don't need to worry about exalting ourselves. We need to worry about glorifying him. And if he wants us exalted, he'll take care of that. That's his business. Let's make his name great. That should be our mission. But you can see the promise there. I will make your name great. Number next, So I'm going to make your name great. Still in verse 2, promise number 4, so that you will be a blessing. You see, the end game was never Abraham himself. It was always others. And it's the same for you and I. The application is crystal easy. God has not blessed us so that we could reservoir our blessings. He's blessed us so that we could be a conduit of blessings to others, so that we could be an outflow of the blessings of God on other people, so that we could bless our Father and bless others. That's why we've been blessed. You have it in your notes. We often wonder what God wants to do for us or to us. We should be wondering, what does God want to do through us? How does God want to use me to glorify His Son? Because that's what it's about. It's not about me. It is about Him. Verse 3. So the first 4 promises packed together in verse 2. Promise number 5 there in verse 3. I will bless those who bless you. I'll honor you and protect you. I'm not going to only bless you, George. Everybody else is going to bless you because I'm going to bless them when they bless you. That's the God we serve. That's what God is up to with Abraham. This is audacious. This is out of the control. This is over the top. These are promises made by God to Abram. And by extension, many of them in many different ways to us. But God is not done. Promise number 6, verse 6. Or excuse me, still in verse 3. Those who dishonor you, I will curse. Those who dishonor you, Abraham, I will curse. 2 different Greek words here. The first word, dishonor, means to disrespect, to despise, to esteem lightly, can be translated curse. The second word means to curse. Those who dishonor you, those who disrespect you, those who treat you lightly, Abraham, I will curse. We'll see that begin to play out today. We'll see how God takes care of His servant Abram, even in the midst of Abram's folly. And isn't it that same way with us? Even sometimes in the midst of our foolishness and silliness and folly, God steps in because of the great promises that He's made to us and delivers. And that's exactly what we'll find that He does here with Abram. But that brings us to number 7, the clincher. We have one more that'll come up in a few verses. And you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now, I said it. How is that even possible? This can't be done. Even if he had children, how is this man 4,000 years ago going to bless every family on the earth? This is surely hyperbole. This is surely an overstatement. This is surely an exaggeration for effect. It's a literary device, right, Rich? It's got to be. No, not at all. This is the scarlet thread. This is the promised Messiah. This is the one who's going to crush the head of the serpent. This is the one now under the banner of the seed of a woman who will be the seed of Abraham, seed singular, who God will bless the nations, plural, all of them. Doesn't matter, Shem, Ham, Japheth, any combination thereof. God has opened the door of blessing to all the nations through Abraham and through the promised seed that would descend from Abraham. And you ready for this? That's exactly what Paul told the church in Galatia. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel before to Abraham. What? The gospel was preached to Abraham? The euangelion, the good news, was preached to Abraham? When was it preached? How was it preached? What's the message? In you shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. This is the gospel. We're reading the gospel tucked away in the Old Testament, the promise that God is sending His seed, born of a woman, descended now, we learned some more information, from Abraham. And He intends to bless all the nations through him. He intends to open a door so that they can be brought back into a relationship with Him in spite of their sins. The gospel declared here in Genesis, chapter 12, as explained by the Apostle Paul in Galatians 3. So that brings us to the end of verse 3, I think, the end of verse 3, and all of those densely packed promises, not quite done. Any questions, anything you want to tease out before we continue to advance the story? And I'm going to check my time real quick just so I don't get in trouble. So Gretchen has a question in the back, Deb, if you'll, thank you.
Is it in you? Oh, in you all the nations of the world will be blessed. Is that like a double meaning with Abraham and Jesus?
So the ultimate blessing is in the seed. The promised blessing. And Paul will go to develop that in just a few verses. That it would not be in the seeds plural, but it would be in the seed singular. It would be in the single seed that would descend out of Abraham, that God would bless all the families of the earth. What an amazing promise. And you and I are the recipients of that promise. You and I are the recipients of those blessings. You and I join the throng who've been blessed when we place faith in God's Son, descended from Abraham. Abram, in this case. We haven't renamed him yet. Anything else? Verse 4. So put yourself in Abraham's sandals for just a second. God has said go. That should have been enough. Then he laid out all of these promises. What are you likely to do? Right, Sarah? So Abraham went. I love it. Abraham's like, I've heard enough. I was disobedient. I had roamed around, left Ur, hung out in Haran for a while. Abraham went as Yahweh told him. Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he departed Haran. His wife was obviously 65 years old when he departed from Haran. Abraham had taken one tiny, teeny baby step of faith while he was in Ur that got him to Haran, and he stopped. God, in his grace, mercy, kindness, and love, shows up again, tells him again to go, and he takes another baby step of faith in his walk by faith. Now, we're going to find, if we were to track Abraham's faith journey here in Genesis 12, he's going to do like this. 2 forward, 3 back, 3 forward, 1 back. We say, wow, how could he do that? Turns out he's a man of like passions, just like you and I. We do some of the same stuff. We lose the promises of God in our faith journey. We forget how awesome and powerful our God is. We forget all the promises he's made us. And we can do the same stuff we're going to watch our brother Abram do today. But do not forget, this man who we're going to watch stumble and bumble in his faith for a number of chapters is going to be the man who lifts the dagger over the chest of his son, fully intending to plunge it into his son and take his life because he's believed in his heart. God told me to kill him, and God has said the seed is promised through him, and the only way those things can be true is I'm going to kill him like God said, and God is going to raise him from the dead. That's what the writer of Hebrews tells us he was thinking. That's how his faith had grown. From this bumbling, stumbling, backward and forward guy to God said it, I don't understand it, but he's the guy who will fulfill his word, I'm going to go do it. So don't worry. All of these trials, tests, and tribulations, like they are meant to do in our life, are going to grow our brother's faith in ways that blow us away. And I pray that these are the things that are happening in our life as we think about walking by faith. And then I would just add another point just to consider. Obviously, Lot is not his son. Lot is his nephew. Lot is his brother's son. And Lot appears to be tagging along for whatever reason. We don't know. We don't fully understand. He's coming along, though. He's there. He's with Sarai. He's with Abram. He's with the servants. And they are headed out. They're leaving. And they're departing from Haran. One more point of application before we leave it. How old is Abram? 75. You're never too old to continue to follow God. None of us. And I'm talking to all of us who are probably in the last season of our life. This is the perfect season to follow Yahweh. And maybe he's waiting now for the greatest thing because we were too strong in our flesh. He needed us to be a little bit weaker, so we rely a little bit more on him. But here he is, called to make this incredible journey, called to walk with God. One more news flash. Abram was not followed to call his parents. He left his dad in Haran. He was not followed to call his children or grandchildren. He was called to follow Yahweh. And that's true for us as well. Now, sometimes our children, grandchildren, and parents may be there with us. Praise the Lord for that. But we've been called to follow God wherever he is calling us. Verse 5. Abram took Sarai, his wife, Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions. Is God blessing him? Absolutely. Let's keep reading. That they had gathered, and the people that he had acquired. He's acquiring stuff. He's acquiring servants. He's acquiring employees. God is richly blessing this man in Haran, and he is now stepping out, and he is headed to the land of Canaan. He collects his possessions, he collects his people, and off he goes to take those baby steps of faith headed for Canaan. It's not just, don't picture in your mind, Sarai, Lot, and Abram. There's all these other people that he's acquired along the way. We're going to run into this guy named Eliezer of Damascus in Genesis 15. It's going to be another test of Abraham's faith that he's going to score poorly on. But Eliezer was probably there already. But they are now headed for Canaan as God has told them to do. So to sort of put this in your mind, and so we left Ur of the Chaldeans with Terah. We have now left Terah in Haran. And now it's Abraham, Sarai, and Lot headed down, still in the Fertile Crescent, to the land of Canaan, with all of their possessions, with all of their stuff, and with all of their people. Now, who lives in the land of Canaan? The Canaanites. Does anybody remember the Canaanites from Leviticus 18 and 20? That's the nation that was cursed by God when the events went on with Noah. You remember all that. And they were cursed because of their horrible sin. We are now bringing this man and his family into enemy territory, the land of the Canaanites. They are about to see things and they are about to experience things that they have never imagined. But this is where God is bringing them. This is where God is going to protect them. This is where God is leading them. But understand, it's potentially dangerous. They're going to see things they maybe wish they had never seen. But don't forget all the promises God made. I'll make of you a great nation. That means he's probably going to live through this event. And he shall lay hold of that fact. So this is the journey. Let's skip a couple of slides there and get back to there. So there's the journey. The trip might be a little difficult. We'll just have to wait and see. Verse 6. Abraham passed through the land to the place of Shechem. Shechem is in Canaan. To the oak of Moreh. At the time, the Canaanites were in the land. So the author wants to make sure we know, hey, the Canaanites are there. This is a wicked place. This is a rough place. And he stops in this place called Shechem at the oak of Moreh. Now, that word translated oak can be translated plain. This could be the plain of Moreh, or it could be this massive tree that they remember because of its look. In either case, they knew what we were talking about. When he stopped in Shechem, the ancient readers knew. They knew where he was. And by the way, just so that we know, the Canaanites were in the land. Verse 7. Here's the title of the lesson. Then Yahweh appeared to Abram. Now, this is the first time this word is used in the Hebrew Bible. We know Adam communed with God. We know in various places God spoke to these people by dream, by vision, by whatever. But here we're told in a way we cannot misunderstand, the Lord appeared. It means to look, to see, to perceive, to behold. The Lord appeared to Abram in Canaan, in enemy territory, with one more promise. He'd given 7 in Haran. It's now time for one more. To your offspring will I give the land. So as he's beholding this land filled with Canaanites, and he has no children, Yahweh says, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. The whole shooting place it belongs to your offspring. What would you say, George? Which was thinking, Meg articulates. She's like, which offspring? I looked in my caboose. There are no offspring. This is just like our God. Just like, see, we lose this. We serve a God who does as he pleases in the armies of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. We serve a God who the king's heart, and that means everybody else, is in his hand. And as rivers of water, he turns it whithersoever he will. We serve an all-powerful God who is not limited by the things that limit us. I don't have any children. No problem. You will soon enough. That's the God Abram serves. That's the God we serve. So God gives this last final, number 8, audacious, impossible, can't be done promise. And what does Abram do? Somebody tell him. He builds an altar. He worships. I'll just give a point of application. When we read the Bible, we start coming across all those great and precious and amazing things that God has done for us in Christ. It should drive us to one thing. It should drive us to worship, just like it did with Abram. It drove him to worship his Creator. He's like, how can this be? Why does my Creator take such interest in me? Because he's such a good, kind, benevolent, loving God. And it should drive us to worship, as it did here in Abram, as God articulated promise number 8 to a man who had no descendants and gave his descendants a land that was filled with Canaanites. And you ready for this? He's going to not only promise it, he's going to do it. The Lord appeared to him and he worshiped, and that is a good lesson for you and I. To your offspring will I give it. So he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. Double repetition there. He appeared to him. He built the altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. We get it. This is the, by the way, second altar building in Genesis, if you're keeping score at home. The first altar was, anybody remember, Noah? Genesis 8:20. This is the second one. This altar is built in Shechem, in enemy territory, as Abram worships Yahweh. Verse 8. From there he moved. So he's in Shechem. He moves a little south to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. So he's moved a little south. We'll look at a map in a second. And he's now between the cities of Bethel and Ai. And he does what? He builds another altar. And we're told in the text that he calls out on the name of Yahweh. Now, is this when he truly placed faith in Yahweh? Had he done that already? I don't have those answers. Just let the text speak to your heart. He cried out to Yahweh. He's in pagan land. He's building these altars to worship him. And then we're given this extra commentary that he cries out to Yahweh. And Meg has a question, Deb, if you'll route that over. So was this his conversion? Was this the moment he said, I'm going to follow you for sure? I've been kind of dabbling, but I'm in. I'm all in. I don't know. But you see, he's calling out on the name of Yahweh. And before I turn over to Meg, I would say this. Obviously, all of us, if we're a believer, have called out to Yahweh at some time or another. But do we continue to call out to him? Do we continue to call out for his direction, his guidance, his watch care, his whatever? Abram called out on Yahweh.
So it doesn't really say here, but when he builds this altar, what does that altar look like? And it seems like he leaves as soon as he builds it. So what's the purpose of building it and leaving?
So Meg, we don't get this extra commentary of what it looked like. What was the building materials? Was it uncut stones like the other altars? What did he know about building an altar? What had been passed down about altar building? There's so many questions we have. Did he offer a sacrifice on the altar that he built? I mean, we have a load of questions. And I would just say, just catch the point. It moved him to do something, to worship God. And I would argue when we read the great and precious promises of God, it should move us not to build an altar, but to worship. To cry out to him and say, God, I can't believe what you've done for me, a sinner. And he called upon the name of the Lord. Verse 9, and Abram journeyed on. So let's look at a map real quick. I think I left the map off. So we got to Shechem, right? So we're in the land of Canaan. You can see Shechem just to the south of Mount Ebal. I wish my pointer would work on the TV, but it doesn't. It absorbs the light. But in the middle of the screen, Mount Ebal, Shechem's below it. You can see he goes just a little bit further south, and he dwells for a temporary time between Bethel and Ai, builds another altar. It's at that place he calls out on the name of the Lord, Genesis tells us. And now we're given additional information in verse 9. And Abram journeys on going toward the Negeb. Now, that's probably not a word you use at home. You probably don't say, honey, let's run to the Negeb. That is a transliteration of the Hebrew word Negeb. It literally means south or southern region or southern area. What we believe is that he travels to the southern region of what would become known as Judea in that area of Samaria, of Simeon, in the Negeb, in the desert, in the southern Judean desert. So imagine what God has done. He's marched him through the promised land. He's gone through the promised land temporarily. By the way, he owns none of this. It's promised to his descendants. Not a stitch is promised to him. He's camping out like a nomad in this place, building altars and worshiping Yahweh in this place. Enemy territory, that's where he's at. And he's now in the southern region. You can picture he's just filled with wonder and awe. The promises of God. He's going to give this land to my descendants and I have none. I mean, that's where he's at. This is a story that would make a great faith novel until we get to the next verse. Any questions before we continue to advance this story? Picture him high on faith. All the promises of God. Verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land. Yahweh didn't get the note. Yahweh did not get the notice that there was a famine in the land. Yahweh knew there was a famine in the land. You say Yahweh was taking his young man and attempting to grow his faith. He was attempting to show him that you don't rely on your own ingenuity. It's not by your arm that you're going to accomplish. You can be in a land where people are starving. I will take care of you. If I have to send a raven to feed you, I will do it. I will make it happen. Trust me. That's what he was teaching. That's what he's always teaching us. The trials and the tribulations come in our life not to destroy us, to dash us, to break us, or to hurt us. The trying of our faith, James said, is to work patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. But sometimes we can do like our brother. The trial can come and we can say, this must not be of God. It's difficult. This is hard. It's a little bit more painful than I thought. This is going to take more effort. This must not be of God. I'll change directions. And you ready for this? Many times the whole time we were right where God wanted us. Because it was there He was going to grow our faith and blossom our faith in a way we had never imagined. He was going to cause us to cling to Him and to see it's not in our ingenuity, it's not in our will, it's not in our strength, it's in Him. Verse 10, so, I'll insert but, Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. We've saw the journey. He's made it to the promised land. He's where God told him to be. Follow me to a land that I will show you. He told him Canaan is what he told him through Terah for sure. He cuts across what we would call the Sinai Peninsula and finds himself in Egypt. And let's be honest, there's no famine in Egypt. It'll be better. It's better off, God. There's food here. I can take care of these people, my little entourage. This is just a better idea, God. I know you said go here, but I've surveyed the land, and this is a better plan. Did God ever tell him to go to Egypt? Not anywhere in the Bible we can find. Did God ever say, I can't take care of you unless you go to Egypt? Not anywhere in the scriptures we can ever find. The last thing we had from God was go to Canaan. Go to the land I'm going to show you. Go to the land I'm promising to your offspring. And his lack of faith caused him to flee to Egypt. Right now, I would say Abram is not scoring well on the faith test. Let's not be too hard on him, though, because I suspect most of us have had similar experiences where we've not scored so well on the faith test. But here we are, and we see Abram, Sarah, and Lot, and they make the turn to go to Egypt. Picking up in verse 11. When he was about to enter Egypt, you can picture this. He said to Sarah, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. How old is she, ladies? 65, thank you. I know her husband looks at her and says, you are stunningly gorgeous, beautiful in appearance, verse 12. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Therefore, say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. Here's the plan. I can picture him striking up this conversation. And George, I don't know how he initiated. Like, if he initiated with, honey, I've got a plan. Or let's consider this. But he looks at her and says, listen, you're a knocked down, drop dead. I'm using my sanctified imagination, okay? You're beautiful, you're gorgeous. And here's what's going to happen. We're going to go into Egypt, and they're pagans just like the Canaanites. They're going to look at you, and they're going to say, she's dropped down, knocked dead, gorgeous. And that's her husband, so we're going to knock him down, kill him, take her, marry her, have her because she's gorgeous. So, honey, we need to do something to take care of me. I need you to say that you're my sister. That way, they don't kill me. Isn't it funny how compromise and sin works? Every single time. It starts small, one little compromise, one little white lie, one little issue, and then it takes a little bit bigger one to fix it, to get it back on track, and a little bit bigger one to get it back on track. This is how Satan works. That's why the Bible tells us not to give place to the devil, because he takes one little place and then he starts squatting out from there. Abraham's had one little compromise and headed for Egypt, and now he's having a compromise that some of us can't even imagine. He's using human logic, human wisdom to try to figure out how he's going to keep this whole thing on track, and his focus point is completely off God and off his wife. He's no longer clinging to the promises of God. He's no longer worried about his wife. He's worried about himself. That way they don't kill me. Here's what he didn't have, but you and I do. Proverbs 3. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. He will make them straight. You see, he did just the opposite. He leaned on his own understanding. He decided this is the only way this is going to work. This is what it's going to take for God's promises to be fulfilled. That's foolish. He didn't know this one either, Proverbs 12. Lying lips are not Rich's word, Yahweh's word. Picking back up in the story, verse 14. Abram entered Egypt. He's a prophet, y'all. The Egyptians saw the woman, and she was, somebody read it for me, very beautiful. Yep, he's right. His wife is very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh, those who served the Pharaoh, those of import in his court, saw her, and they praised her to Pharaoh. This word is normally used for praising God. She was so beautiful and so incredible. The princes are like, I don't even rate this woman. This woman is so gorgeous. The only person in the whole area who should have her is Pharaoh. And they went and praised her to Pharaoh, and look what happened. As if the prophet said it, the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Exactly what he said is exactly what has happened. Verse 16. And for her sake, Sarai's sake, he, the Pharaoh, dealt well with Abram. Abram had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, camels, money, gold, silver, everything but one thing. Thank you. His wife. His wife is in the court of the Pharaoh, probably going through a process, as we'll see in a second, to become his wife, which will no doubt end with consummating that relationship. That's where this sin has brought our brother. Can you imagine what's going through his mind right now? Can you imagine what's going through Sarai's mind right now? Remember what got them there. It's what gets us there, a lack of faith. But here's the good news before we go to the next verses. We serve a God who's bigger than our lack of faith. We serve a God who will step over our lack of faith sometimes and do what we do not deserve to correct a situation he was not even involved in, and we shouldn't have been involved in because we were not walking with him, because we'd stopped listening, because we wanted to do it our way. And nonetheless, because he's kind, loving, patient, merciful, our Father, he will step in and drop the engine in reverse and undo what we were doing. And that's exactly what we're about to see. But anything else, any other questions before we advance the story a little bit further? In the back, Grace has her hand up.
When a woman does not want to submit, this is a good case that the Lord will protect her even when her husband is not leading properly.
Grace, this is a great case study for all of us. This is a great reminder. If I could give you two things, if we could just have two nuggets to take home, let's live our life by faith. Let's not lean on our own understanding. Let's in all our ways acknowledge him, and he will direct our path. Let's not look at situations and circumstances and make that be the decision if God is in it or not. Let's expect that if God is in it and God is calling me to step out by faith and do something that's going to be meaningful for the kingdom, that there might be opposition, that Satan and his dominion might not want to give up ground. Let's expect that there may be some difficulty, and it will be an opportunity for my faith to blossom into areas it's never blossomed in before. Let's approach it that way.
This was the question. These male servants, bottom line, the male servants, is this slavery?
So this is indentured servants. So don't think of like American version of slavery, but think of indentured servants. These are servants that he's picked up likely in Haran, maybe even some in Egypt. We're not sure how long he was in Egypt, but these are servants. He has an entourage. we're going to see he forms a little army here in a couple of chapters with his servants. He is not, don't picture three guys roaming through the desert. Well, two guys and a gal roaming through the desert. Well, the gal's gone now, so two guys roaming through the desert. Don't picture that. Picture God blessing Abram just like he promised. That's what you should picture. In spite of Abraham's best attempts to negate these blessings. Anything else before we advance the story a little bit further? Okay. But, I love that conjunction. Things are good with Abram. Things are good with Sarai. Things seem to be on track. But Yahweh, oh yeah, God's in this equation. But Yahweh afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues, plural, because of Sarai, Abram's wife. It may have been okay with Abram, and he may have been a place where he had sort of rationalized this away, and Sarai may have been comfortable, although we can't imagine she was. But it doesn't matter. There was one person in this party who was not comfortable. And it was the one who could do something. And it was the Lord himself. And it wasn't any misdoing or anything the Lord had done, but the Lord watched all of this play out in time, and the Lord afflicted. The Hebrew word there is touched. The Lord touched Pharaoh's house with great plagues, plural. Can you imagine? Because I love imagining, I love picturing. His entire home, his entire house, his entire palace, everyone who reports to him is inflicted with some type of disease, some type of plague. Everyone has some form of boil in the entire court, with the exception of one person. That young 65-year-old lady we just brought into the harem. She seems to be faring well. She's not covered in boils or spots or whatever this looked like. The Lord inflicted the entire palace with plagues, plural. Now, we don't know how. Not only did he know what was going down, Pharaoh, he, by the way, we could refer to him as a king, an emperor, the strongest man in the land, the one who could take anyone's life in that area whenever he wanted. This is the ruler of the nation of Egypt, and his entire house, his entire palace is inflicted with great plagues. And he comes to know, however he came to know it. Did God go to him in a dream? Was it a vision? We don't know. But he comes to know his whole palace is inflicted because of one reason. And her name is Sarai, and her husband, Abram. Verse 18. So Pharaoh called Abram. Imagine being called to the White House, except it's much bigger than that, because the Pharaoh is the most powerful man in the world. He could take Abram's life with just a word. He could just look at one of the many guards and say, kill that guy. He's brought all this on us. But look at what he does. Pharaoh calls Abram and he says, what is this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister? So that I took her for my wife. Here's the most powerful man in the world. And you know what he's not saying? Kill that guy. God has visited our friend Pharaoh. And I don't know what the backstory is. We'll see one in Gerar. We'll see one with Abimelech that's very similar, and I think it's a very similar backstory. I suspect, sanctified imagination, that the Lord showed up in a vision or a dream to Pharaoh, and he said, let me tell you something, Pharaoh. You've got a woman in your court who you're getting ready to marry and consummate the marriage, and if you go one step farther, I will kill you. In fact, not only will I kill you, I'll kill everyone in this palace. Let me tell you something, Pharaoh, if you don't let her go right now, I will slick everything and everyone. The last memory of you will be boils and a plague. That's how your story will end. You better set her free now, and you better not touch her husband. Do you understand me, dear Mr. Pharaoh? And Pharaoh marched into his palace, and Abram marched in, and Pharaoh was probably mad as all get out at that nomad sand roamer. But he was more afraid of the God who had showed up in a vision by night, who had said, don't touch him. And if you do, you're a dead man walking. And then look what he said. And he sent them on their way with his wife and all that he had. He asked these 3 rapid-fire questions. He didn't even give him a chance to answer. The answer was irrelevant. You need to go. because Yahweh told me if you go, I'm going. They gave him everything he had. They gave him his wife. They loaded up every donkey, every camel, every coin, and they said, go. Here's the sad part. God does this throughout the Old Testament. God had taken time to make his power known to a pagan ruler. He could have killed him. He could have walked there, gave him one of those. You're done. Sarah, you're out of here. He had taken the opportunity to make his power and himself known. This Pharaoh responded only to the power, but he never responded to the God. God had taken the opportunity to make himself known. This Pharaoh rejected knowledge and never turned from his ways, as best we can tell. We find this throughout the Old Testament. When you read the plagues of Egypt, it says this over and over again. He did this so that they would know it was him, so that they would know that Yahweh was God. So we get the 3 rapid-fire questions. No chance for an answer. Get this man out of here. Verse 20. Pharaoh gives orders to the men concerning him, and they send him away, his wife, and all that he has. You can picture them leaving the court. Any questions? Yeah, Janice.
All right, until you explained it, I looked at it differently. Because when Abram took his crew with them to the land that God told him to go to, it said on some notes in my version of the Bible that he could have had hundreds of people with him.
He had a lot of people.
Okay, so then it's a severe plague. And so I don't see where God said, don't leave this land. So he leaves it and goes to Egypt where there's food for him and the hundreds of people. And then he's like, there's going to be a problem, though, because we're married. And obviously, she looked in her 20s because of the age difference at that time and everything
But
else.
65 is the new 25,
Right.
whatever.
So then she's like, okay, I'll do this, because if I don't, they're going to kill you and the whole thing's going to blow up. So she did what her husband asked her to do for the sake of him and the group that he was with. And God punishes the Pharaoh, not Abram.
That's the story.
Until, yeah.
I think you got it.
Okay.
I think you got it. The Pharaoh took this woman into his court, and God is not going to allow this woman to consummate a marriage with the Pharaoh. And in spite of Abram and Sarah's folly, but Abram in particular, God steps in, stops the train right on the track. It's going no further. Now, did he do anything to Pharaoh? No. Well, let's look at what he did with Abimelech. Watch this. This happens again, by the way, y'all, just so you know. You would think, question over here, so we'll go over to the mic. The mic will work its way there, Deb, and I'll answer them. You would think Abram would never do this again, right? You would think this experience would be enough. You never have to tell this lie again. And it's not a full lie. It was his, half-sister. It was a lie.
That was what I was going to say.
Yep.
Was that
It wasn't
she
a full lie, but yes, it was.
Yeah.
Because the lie was, it was his wife, right? That was the whole thing. That was what they were covering up. But let's look at when this happens again, Genesis 20. We have a couple of minutes, so I'll do it. Because I think it's going to be something very similar that we see here. We just don't have as much detail. So Abraham journeys. This is a few chapters later, by the way. In fact, 8 chapters. And he journeys toward the territory of the Negeb. And he lives between Kadesh and Shur. And he sojourns in an area called Gerar. And Abraham said to Sarah, his wife, so he's telling everyone, she is my... What? Don't you remember? That was just 8 chapters ago. Are you that forgetful? So he's telling everyone in Gerar, she is my sister. And Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. No surprise. She's a beautiful 60-something, maybe 70-year-old woman, because 70 is the new 30 or whatever. And so the king of Gerar takes her. Verse 3. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night. And he said to him, behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you've taken, for she is a man's wife. Now, had Abimelech, we're going to see Abimelech has not done anything wrong, but God is stopping this train on the track. It goes no further. You're a dead man, for she's a man's wife. Verse 4. Now, Abimelech had not approached her, so he had moved her into the palace. She was going through the process, but he had not done anything to her. So he said, Lord, will you kill an innocent people? Verse 5. Did he not himself say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he's my brother? In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands I've done this. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you've done this in the integrity of your heart, but it was I who kept you back from sinning against me. He said, are you kidding? You're like a wild dog on meat. The reason you haven't already consummated the marriage is not your intention. It's because the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. And I stopped it from happening because he's my prophet and she's his wife. And it's not going to happen because I'm the God of glory. Picking back up in verse 6, God said to him in the dream, I know you've done this in the integrity of your heart. I've kept you back from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now, then, return the man's wife, for he's a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. I bet the same thing happened in Egypt. I bet he prayed for them, and the plagues dispersed. But if you do not return her, know that you will surely die. You and all who are yours. I will wipe this place out. You think I'm playing with you? I'm the God of glory, and you better let it go right now. Look what Abimelech does. So Abimelech rose early in the morning. I bet he didn't sleep. I bet he was drinking coffee all night, waiting for the sun to rise so he could go track down Abram. So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called his servants, and he told them all these things, and the men were very much afraid. And we know where this story goes. He gets them all together. He tells them, hey, live in the land wherever you like. Do whatever you want to do. No one's going to touch you. I promise. You see, that's what went down here. We have the same promise. God will never leave us. God will never forsake us. Even in the midst of sin and folly and foolishness, he's trying to grow our faith. And he's never going to kick us to the curb if we're his. Kristen, okay, thank you.
I'm just, with God being a just God, how is his justice perfect in this instant where he's going to kill somebody who did not know they were sinning and yet in the same hand didn't punish Abraham at all?
Yeah, good question. So, he didn't kill him, right? He told him what he's doing, and then he said, if you do not stop what you're doing, I'm going to what? Kill you. So I would agree with you. It would be unjust to some degree for him not to know anything about what he was doing when the man himself had said, she's my sister, and the woman had said, he's my brother, and then God just comes in and squishes him out. But that's not what he said. God showed up in power and said, what you're doing is wrong. He explained it all, laid it out, and they said, you better return her or judgment will fall. So the good news is, once again, God steps in and makes himself known to this pagan king. Our God keeps doing this. This pagan king didn't know him, and now this pagan king should have come to believe a God who can show it. He believed he could do it. He let this guy go. He gave everything back. But we have no indication that he ever turned and worshiped that God. He just responded to power.
So then what about Abraham? I mean, is it just because the marriage covenant is so strong and sacred versus just telling a lie, even though all sin is equal? Like, Abraham never seems to get God's wrath at all, despite messing up continuously.
Yeah, he's a lot like us in that way.
Yeah.
He's a lot like Rich in that way. And he never got the land. The land was never promised to him. In fact, the writer of Hebrews tells us he never got so much as a stitch. Never got so much as a foot fling. And John has a question back. And we still have a few minutes, so we're fine. But I do have to get the last verse. No, you're fine.
I've got a little different perspective.
Give it to us, brother. Well, let's do it.
So we know that Abraham, before he went to Egypt, he built the altars, he worshipped and all that. And then it does seem like he made some decisions on his own. We don't know that he didn't pray to the Lord that says, hey, there's a famine here, what should I do? And God told him. The Bible doesn't say that God told him. That's true. Just like you said, it's true. But we don't know that God didn't tell him, right? And
absolutely.
Even the idea of saying that Sarai was his sister, which kind of seems a little deceitful, and I have a lot of heart for all the women in here. because that put her in jeopardy. But we don't know that that wasn't God's plan also to protect her.
Here's why I would say. Let me interrupt because I think that. Well, finish your. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Finish,
one
finish.
other, and when Pharaoh let him go, we don't know that God told Pharaoh to let him go. That's not in the Bible. We do know in the case of Abimelech, God did tell him, right? So we're giving Abraham a hard time here, and I'm not sure it's totally justified.
Yeah, so John, of course you're right. I would only add that if you remember, Abraham hatched this whole plan. Why? Because he decided in his heart, and he shared it with his wife, that if I say you're my wife, they will kill me. That is a lack of faith in any stretch of the imagination. God had promised that he was going to make a great nation of this man. That is not possible if he's dead. I would argue, and John, you're right at all points, but I would argue this is a lack of faith. Because God has made some amazing and precious promises, and when the going got a little off the rails, he fell back. And there's a question up front, Deb, or whoever has the mic, and I think we still have a couple of minutes. Oh, there's one in the back.
Any chance, I'm going with John here for a minute.
Okay, yes, please.
I did notice in that when he said, Abram saying to Sarai, I got to do this, I got to do that, and for your sake, or for my, so he doesn't get killed. I know it's a somewhat of a lack of faith, but he's still a human man and he's being talked to by God, but we don't know all the conversation. But there's also this promise upcoming of them having a child together. So I'm sort of going with John. Is there any chance that even though he's having some lack of faith, he's knowing he's got to fulfill this promise?
Absolutely, there's a chance. So yeah, and I mean, to go to John's point, we are coloring, right? We're coloring in places that the Bible doesn't speak to. And so don't hear of this is Rich says and this is true. This is Rich's understanding of the way the text is playing out, but we are coloring in places that are not colored as best we can. And so could it be that he was completely walking by faith and this was all part of it? Absolutely, it sure could be. So don't hear no, can't be crazy talk. Yeah, Rich.
From a perspective I take, I think that what we're asked to see is the faithfulness of God to his covenant, even when there's an absence of faithfulness by the partner that he's enlisted in the covenant. And so when we focus on it, we can put Abraham where we want on the continuum of could he possibly have heard, could he possibly have misunderstood. But the reality is God didn't misunderstand. The reality is God didn't choose someone else to stand in his place when he had an important partnership for all time, a partnership that was ultimately going to lead to our Savior, and he stood firm and faithful at a time when his partner was not faithful.
And that's the lesson, isn't it? That's what we take home. In spite of our sin, folly, and foolishness at times, our God is faithful. And so I'm completely out of time. I'll read just a couple of verses to remind us. Psalm 46, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the sea, though the waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble. It doesn't matter what happens. These are big cataclysmic events. God is our refuge and our strength. We should trust in the Lord with all our heart. Lean not on our own understanding. In all our ways acknowledge him, and he will direct our path. So the story ends today here, 13:1. So after this whole event with Pharaoh, after everything that's happened, guess what Abram did? Went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, with Lot, back to the promised land, back to southern Judea, back to the Negev. So if I'm right, if he's taking a couple of steps back and a couple of steps forward and a couple of steps back, he now takes a few more forward to get back into the promised land in his walk, in his journey of faith. And I pray the lessons of faith would be learned by us to trust in the Lord with all our heart. Let's pray.